background noise there. Great. So the theme for today is balance. All ever-present balance, gotta love it. Great topic. And the overall intention for our session today is to connect with some amazing instructors, learn from the best in the business, have a bit of fun as we do it. And then at the end, we're going to have a giveaway. We've got 3 gift cards that we're going to be giving away. So make sure you stick around for that. My name is Jeff Scott, and I'll be serving as your moderator for the evening. We've got an hour to get through everyone, so I'll try and keep the flow rolling. I work with BC Adapted Snowsports. I'm actually on their board, and I've done a lot in the adaptive snow sports world through the Live It, Love It Foundation, which I co-founded. And that's
Jeff, you just muted yourself. Sorry.
That's strange how that happened. So I believe there'll be a lot of questions tonight. And I think the best way to manage those will be if you can type them into the chat bar on the side. We'll make a note of who you'd like them directed to, Heather, Susan, or Josh. And we'll have a question period at the end where we can try and get as many of those questions through as we can. So with that being said, I think we can get right into it. It's my pleasure to introduce Heather Bilodeau and Susan Hughes. We'll be leading our first technical discussion on balance. Well, my apologies. Yeah, okay, so I'm reading some notes here. They'll be leading the balance. Balance. I'm sure there's no better team to do so. For those of you that don't know, Susan Hughes is the technical development lead for BC Adaptive Snowsports. She started her journey in 1983 with a visually impaired guiding experience. Since then, Susan has become a CADS Level 4 instructor, a course conductor, and renowned technical development specialist with unwavering passion for supporting and developing our local instructors here in BC. And for those who don't know Heather, she is also a huge part of the ski instruction world. She was a member of Canada's demonstration team for 8 years and the only woman on the 1987 interski team. She has served on both provincial and national CSIA technical committees and is a level 4 CSIA instructor. For those of you that know, Heather has been a long-standing contributor to Ski Magazine for 22 years, along with her husband, Dawn. Her and Dawn owned and operated the ski school, or the School of Skiing and Snowboarding at Panorama Resort for 26 years. And they've since retired and moved to Whistler. So a huge thank you to Susan and Heather for joining us tonight and taking the reins from me now leading into this. Take it away.
Well, thank you, Jeff. I cannot tell you how exciting this is to see all your faces. And when we can't always be on snow, it's really great to see you, even your little pictures that I'm looking at, pretty much from all over BC. So welcome Mount Baldy instructors, welcome Panorama, Smithers, lots of Vancouver and Whistler, And Gord from Saskatchewan, thank you for joining us. You know, we actually were going to have a fully international event tonight because Veronica, who normally is at Sun Peaks, she's in Australia. Anyway, something came up and she couldn't make it. So we'll just have to live with being fully national panel discussion tonight. So as Jeff said, our subject is balance. So it's pretty wide open, and hopefully we'll have a little bit of fun tonight. But mostly, let me just start out with a definition of balance. So I had a little bit of fun with this. I looked it up. I went to my best friend Google. And according to yourdictionary.com, there are up to 77 best definitions of balance, ranging from physical and biomechanical to financial and mental or emotional stability and everything in between. So you can be in, on, off, or out of balance. But let's focus on a sports-related definition. That states that balance is the ability to stay upright or stay in control of body movement. Makes sense when we're on snow, right? And more specifically, in skiing and snowboarding, that's to maintain your center of mass over the base of support. Taking it another step further, in CSIA, which is Canadian Ski Instructors Alliance, in the CSIA instructor manual, it says, the use of all joints help maintain balance, providing the ability to manage forces acting on the ski and skier. Or, I like to simplify things, or to be mobile and agile in order to be balanced. But most importantly, for our purpose this evening, and to let you know, Heather and I had a little chat before, so we're going to tag team a little bit. So for the purpose of this evening, we wanted to focus on the fact that balance is dynamic. It's not static. And in fact, we're going to use it as a progressive verb. So it's an action. And I think with that, Heather, I'll let you continue. You're still on mute. There we go.
Oh, you missed the most eloquent part. I want to thank you for the privilege of joining this Zoom meeting, because I'm always amazed at the adaptive athletes and the participants, and I'm equally as impressed by the body of volunteers and coaches and guides. And so I cannot tell you what a privilege it is to be part of this. So yes, as Susan and I talked about, balance being dynamic, fluid, always moving. It's not isometric, it's isotonic. So I think, when you, as Susan was saying, all the different variables that there are on snow, you have to have your body weight distribution, and then you've got friction and resistance. So you have wind, and you have various conditions of snow, sticky snow, thick snow, fast snow, and then you have inertia. So the snowboard or the skis are changing direction, and then your body is fighting that. It's resisting or opposing that direction. That said, balance is a lot to deal with. So I'm going to say in a nutshell, my philosophy for balance in skiing is to find the sweet spot, to just find the sweet spot and aim at that. And for a realistic goal, to try to be in perfect balance all the time, you will feel like you're failing, because you're always making little movements with most of your body parts, muscles, joints, all that sort of thing. You're always making adjustments. So you're not seeking that static, perfect balance all the time. For me, the shortcut is I want to find the sweet spot at the tail end of the turn. So in 3 parts, establish a nice base, and that's sort of a light touch. Then you have the middle part where you might adjust, be out of balance, be just off balance. And then the third part is to land in balance. So my favorite thing to do is a very quick, sharp stop, which will help you find that balance point. Now I'm going to segue now into balance as an attitude. So Susan and I did talk about this as well. Continuing from the idea that, you're not trying to be in that static, perfect balanced position all the time. Try to find the tail end of the turn to align all of that. When I think of someone like Bodie Miller, who I used to like watching on the race circuit, I saw him do some really Herculean moves where he was in a Royal Christie with his ski behind him, having come off the Super G course in Nagano, and he got the foot back around to the front and then came to a stop. And in that moment, I thought to myself, the reason why he could do that is because he's embraced being out of balance so many times. So in terms of attitude, I want to say, if you're critical of yourself that you're out of balance, then you have this little narrative going, oh, darn, I'm out of balance. And then you blow all the rest of the turns. But if you embrace being out of balance will help you find balance, then it's just a great opportunity for a gymnastic move. And then the next part of the attitude is thinking about that balance has a lot to do with visual as well. So if you think about how we walk, when you walk, by the time your foot's placed in front of you, your brain's already seen that. So if you have an attitude of forward thinking for that sweet spot or the tail end of the turn or whatever, your visual field has a lot to do with how you land in balance. So if you think about cycling, for example, you go where you look. The visual field, you're not going where your turn is. That's your peripheral. You're going down the hill at all times. So that's actually your visual focus, which will help you balance to that position. And your peripheral is in and around where the skis are turning. The reason why I think about the visual is because I had a concussion a handful of years ago. I got to the physiotherapist. I said, there's nothing wrong with me. She said, close your eyes, stand on one foot, and I fell on the floor. I did it again. Close your eyes, stand on the other foot. I fell on the floor because I understand how much the brain, the eye, and the inner ear has a huge part of balance in terms of, where your feet are. We think of balance on skiing and on snowboarding and sit skis and all that sort of thing as your mass being centered. But you have to have the visual component of it. Susan?
Well, you've touched on so much. I just want to say, when Heather talks about being out of balance and or searching for that balance, that's me. I some days I just feel like I am constantly searching, and on those days, here's a couple of little things that I might do. So my go-to favorites, this is just for me to recenter so that I'm closer to finding that balance point. And anyone who's ever skied with me, they know that I'm constantly out of balance, and so we have to work with it. But one of the things that I like to do is, well, first of all, I think that it's an active decision to then seek that balance. So then I go to my favorite go-to drills or exercises, or just they're simply things that tend to work for me. And so my favorite, now I'll come up with 2 of them. I tend to do a power plow. I mean, it does other things, but for me, it tends to center me and realign my balance. So I like to do a power plow. And the other thing that I've been really working mostly the last couple of years is really engaging that core. And in order to do that, there's some people call it different things, you know, simply engaging your core or like a pelvic tilt, however it is that you can feel that the body is engaging. Once again, to me, what works for me, that tends to recenter. But I know Heather's got some other dynamite tricks. So
I just have one cheater because I'm known as the pole Nazi. And I want to do a shout out to Tori Fain because, you know, as a physiotherapist and as an athlete, she qualified that it was okay how much time I spend talking about the arm position and the proximity of the poles to the snow. She qualified that the hands are a very tactile part of skiing. And I've always wondered, why do I spend so much time thinking about my hands to align my feet? And I do because if the poles are the right distance to the snow, it has shortened your core, it's tightened your shoulder muscles, it's tightened the pecs so that you have the core that Susan talks about. And if your hands are within distance of the snow almost all the time, they don't have to be on the snow, but they're near the snow, it keeps from rotary movements, it keeps from lateral movements. It's my go-to because my hands tell me where the slope is, how steep it is, you know, where it is in relationship to where my momentum is going to go. And so I would say one of my favorites is, having the poles, dragging the poles a little bit. I do it in, you know, poor light. I do it to get my feet back underneath me. And I would do also a little shuffle. So hands are anchoring the poles to the snow, tightening your core, and then allowing you to shuffle the feet beneath your core. Because as Susan so eloquently began with, skiing and snowboarding is the base of support adjusting below the mass, not the mass moving in adjustment over the base of support. So if you anchor the mass with the poles and then shuffle your feet back and forth, that is a very dynamic exercise for finding your balance point, because you're really not centered the whole time you're on the ski. For a while, sometimes the feet get ahead and you catch up to them and then they come back underneath you. It's just a good aligning exercise, I think.
cool. So if we were to, I just, you know, move on from exercises. So if we're going to talk about balance, I think we can agree that it's dynamic and that it's ever changing, or we are ever changing to react to the balance. So in other words, it's really important that we then react to changing balance and embrace that movement so we can stay upright. I mean, that was the definition from a sports perspective, which relates to cycling. And I just saw this sign the other day. I thought, ooh, I'm going to use that one. So I read this sign, and I think it's kind of appropriate. So it says, life is like riding a bicycle, and to keep your balance, you must keep moving. So Heather alluded to, as we're riding a bike, you know, there's aspect, we're not looking right below us, we're looking where we're going, we're constantly moving. And that would be the same in skiing and snowboarding. The other thing, and it's really interesting, all of a sudden this focus on balance. So as we all know, BC came out with new orders as of midnight last night. But as I read through the press release, it was really interesting because Dr. Bonnie Henry said something like, our balance is off right now. Mm-hmm. I thought, ooh, I can use that too. So, you know, in life, we're needing to balance this whole COVID thing. I mean, we could go on for like a whole different night on balance in COVID. You know, it's not about skiing, it's about in life. So I think on that note, maybe we could stop there, and I don't want to cut you off, Heather, but you know, join in. But we'll leave it at that. And I do want to acknowledge there was a question for clarifying what I mean with a power plow. So maybe I can just quickly address that. I think that was for you, Leanne. And a power plow is like a snow plow where, well, I haven't actually had to describe it in words here. So you're in a snow plow and you're focused on one leg, one foot to make that turn. So if I am doing a power plow, I'm applying a lot of pressure on my right to engage a left turn. So I can't really do that if I'm sort of on the back of my skis, or if my my hands aren't where I can see them. And hopefully that helps you clarify, or helps clarify that question.
Can I add one little thing for the power plow?
Please.
It's, you know, I don't want this to be complicated, but in a power plow, if you have your right foot, and we talk about the sweet spot, so you've centered, you know, over the whole boot length, you're going to press on the ski like it's a bow. But while the right foot is working, the opposite side of the upper body is resisting. So right foot in skiing belongs to left shoulder, and then the opposite. By the time you're pressing on the left foot, it comes right up at a diagonal for the right shoulder, because skiing is resistance, not pulling or pushing.
That is awesome. A wealth of knowledge between Heather and Susan. Thank you so much for sharing that with us. I came into this a little flustered, and all the talk of balance, my visualization, I was able to calm, find my breath, and engage. This is great. I'm excited, especially because our next guest is none other than Josh Dueck, a good friend of mine who I don't see enough of these days. For those of you that don't know Josh, he is a man that needs no introduction, but I'm going to give him one anyways. Multi-medalist, 2 silvers at the Olympics, the Paralympics, 1 gold at the Paralympics, medaled twice at X Games, has a feather in his cap for being the first sit skier to land a backflip. And there's been no shortage of people to land it since, following in his footsteps. I've had the pleasure of spending time in the mountains with Josh and love the way he is able to drop wisdom. So without further ado, I'll pass the reins over to Josh. Take it away, my man.
Thank you, Jeff. That means a whole lot coming from you. I know those words come from the heart. Jeff and I, we have had many a days in the mountains together, and I found it beautiful and ironic to be invited to this group to talk about balance, as in my opinion, Jeff is far more the master in the conversation on balance than I am. Susan and Heather, you technically and even philosophically filled so many buckets that I was, thinking about in coming into this conversation as well. Before I venture off into a mixed array of approach to balance, and I say that because I don't know much about balance, which is pretty funny. I feel like we should be using anything that I say here and out as a point of reference of perhaps what not to do. Although I did hear Heather allude to Bodie Miller and his ability to come in and out of balance and flirt with that line of chaos. That was an area that I think that I may dabble in. But before I start, and I don't know if I missed this at the top of the show, Jeff, because I did come in late, but just wanted to recognize and feel it's crucial that we do recognize and learn from the origins of the places that we call home. in order to honor those that have lived off these lands since time immemorial. And so together we mentioned that we're really a big part of Turtle Island right now. We've got a national demographic going on right now, which is sweet. And so together I'd like to acknowledge that the many lands at which we gather are traditional lands of First Nations and home to a diverse range of Indigenous peoples. In our sport, it's a beautiful thing. We get to honor the connection with the land and rivers and respect the importance of the environment. So in our own way, we get to be stewards and keepers of the land, but it's always good to recognize where we come from and who was here before. So the conversation of balance, I remember a great teacher of mine, Daniel Wesley, and for those of you that know the history of the Paralympic movement and the sport of sit ski, that name may ring a bell. And Daniel was the outlaw in his day and a Jedi master for a young guy like myself coming up through the ranks. And Daniel was quick to really educate and challenge us to think what is balance and really how do we create a balanced ski turn. And I don't know anybody that can arc a ski as well as Danny Boy. And that was literally, he was doing that with a sit ski that was made out of a lamppost, and at first no suspension, and then he got an air shock out of an old Corvette and kind of handcrafted his own sit ski, and he still has the best turn that I've seen when he was doing it with like materials out of a dumpster, if you will. He encouraged us to think, what is stance and balance, and what does that mean? And I think I'd be just repeating what Susan and Heather just said. You know, we want to be stacked. We want our upper body and our core to be like level over top of the ski, and then lower body has a little bit of movement, and that creates an efficiency in between turns. So we have stance and balance is critical. That's your foundation. And then we've got, what do we have here? Line and direction, timing and coordination, pressure and edging. So the 4 different phases of a turn, but it always starts with stance and balance. And the rest of those can be interchanged, points 2, 3, and 4, if we have good stance and balance. Now, as Susan was talking about, and I completely agree with, is that balance is true to the moment. It's not a static, or pardon me, it might've been Heather as well. You guys were both sharing the dialogue and it was a beautiful thing, but like balance is not static. And if we look to a great singer and songwriter, John Lennon, it's like, it's not about the destination, it's about the journey more so. And so balance is not a destination, it's not a place that we arrive at. It is constantly in motion and moving. So the bike analogy was another very beautiful thing. I recognize this because I was never in balance coming down the hill. I took an effort at coaching, and very fortunate to have spent time working with Jeff Scott in the Live It, Love It Foundations and acting as a mentor for people that have recently acquired a disability. And the ethos of Live It, Love It is very simple: empowerment through adventure and healing through community. So we bring folks to these really wonderful environments like Jeff has in his backdrop, and then we go and play. And I took an effort at coaching, and I was like, we were talking about things like balance and how do you make a good turn, Mr. Dueck? I said, Mr. is my dad's name, call me Josh. And we were playing with the notion of turning. And Jeff, you actually nailed something so beautiful at the beginning here. And you were talking about just like you came in a little bit maybe on edge, and then you found your center again through your breath. And for me, that's been just critical in my experience of gliding down the mountain, and also sharing that experience with other people. And it is more of that mind-body relationship or a spiritual connection to something that's bigger than ourselves, and also maybe creates the space within to allow for those micro movements to constantly be narrowing in on that moving target of balance that we're striving towards. I know that sounds very esoteric and out there, but the reality is if we can center ourselves through our breath, we're more likely to expand that sweet spot of what balance really is. And perhaps Bodhi was on point with a nice deep breath when he was doing his little stem Christie and pulling that ski out of the back pocket and saving himself a blown ACL and coming down the mountain as it was. And further to that point, I do want to reference the value of breath in bringing balance in critical situations when things are entering into chaos, because That would be my defense statement when someone's like, hey, he knows he's balanced. I've seen him ski before. He can balance his sit ski coming down the mountain. And indeed, there is some truth to that. But when you challenge the line in sport or in life or in any practice, it's you're constantly pushing yourself just outside of that balance, just outside of that comfort. And another great teacher once told me that magic lies just outside of our comfort zone. And so I want to go back to this moment in Sochi that I had running the downhill, and the downhill was pure chaos. We're hitting, speeds of 120 plus on that track, and the conditions were pretty rotten. And in the training days in advance to the actual run, we saw many of our friends and peers and other athletes heli-evac'd off the run. It was brutal. It was destroying people. There was a pitch called Russian trampoline where we went from like 50K to 120 in half a turn. And I couldn't get my head wrapped around technically how to find balance and how to make my way down the hill safely and quickly is the name of the game, especially at the big show. And if I was to pull up my journal from the night before in the training days, it really just lands spot on with what Jeff was talking about in terms of finding our center through our breath. And every single turn, there was nothing technical left to talk about. It's like inhale here and exhale there. And then all the way down the mountain, I couldn't tell you technically what I was doing or how things were shaping up, but it was literally just all drawn in and tied into the breath. And I could also bring similar stories to the experience of managing the nerves and the energy of being in the start gate at home in Vancouver 2010. And that's where a shared friend, colleague, and mentor for both Jeff and I, Dr. John Coleman, really reminded me the importance of creating space through our breath. And where we create more space, we maybe create more room for balance, a bigger sweet spot again, if you will. And I guess we could, the notes that I had jotted down for tonight is, a little bit on the technical. So I talked about the stance and balance is our core. That is our center for all other movements when it comes to line and direction, timing and coordination, and pressure and edging. Those three other aspects of a turn to many degrees can be interchanged. However, the core and the base always has to be a strong stance and balance. And for everybody that varies a little bit, right? Whether you're upright on two skis, one ski, whether you're sitting down on one or two, I don't think it really matters. I think everybody can find their own sweet spot. And as Susan said, it's like biking, that balance is in motion. So I don't really have a lot of technical feedback on, like, if you drive your left shoulder forward a little bit and create that she shape, you're going to be indestructible. I don't have that feedback for you, sorry. But I do know that, or at least I've come to learn that there's many other aspects to finding balance in our experience in the mountains, and that's finding balance in the other aspects of our life as well. Not always easy, but I would frame them into personal, professional, and spiritual. For whatever that means, right? Your personal could be finding some sort of semblance and balance with your family, or your own personal goals for health and well-being. Professional, those ones seem to be a little more brass tacks and tangible. Like to find balance, we want to be calculated and informed with some of the decisions that we make in the business world, which I'm sure Jeff is biting his tongue. He's like, calculated and informed, Dueck. You light a stick of dynamite and run. Is spiritual as well. Like, what is your center and your core? And for me, I feel like it is that connection with the breath, and that breath is connecting us to something much larger than ourselves. And so as an athlete, I never was able to maintain balance in any one sphere at any given time. My personal life went way out of balance when my sporting life found a little more semblance to balance. Spiritual and professional as well, they seem to interchange a little bit. So I think it's knowing what your core is in the key pillars or departments of your life, and then understanding that they will fluctuate in and out of balance, like rings around a planet, if you will. Some look like they've got good balance, other are out of balance, but as long as at the end of the day, the sum total, you find some sort of balance in that. I say that because skiing is a very dynamic sport. And in order to find balance in the mountains, we should be striving to achieve balance in all aspects of our life, but understanding that that might not always be possible. And I bet if it was, I'd be, at least for me, I might find it to be a bit of a dull ride. I kind of like it when things are a bit wobbly, and maybe that's a bit of the Bodie Miller, the aspirant in me. I look at that and I see a person who is willing to engage and embrace all things that come towards, but he's also quite prepared for what those situations may or may not be. At risk of really just droning on now and wasting everybody's time with philosophical ramblings and personal takes on balance, because again, I don't know much about balance. I found it hilarious for both Jeff Suave and Jeff Scott to have passed on an invitation. And of course, I'd say yes, it's been a pleasure to eavesdrop a little bit with Susan and Heather, and as well see so many familiar faces out and about right now. And for our friends in Whistler, I'm sorry for the disappointing news that was bestowed our way in the last 24 hours. And for those of you that are in Ontario, I'm so thankful that you've been able to find some time on snow even later in the season. And for the rest of us in the middle, maybe we'll pick up the balance for the rest of the crew and make the most of these long days and understand that each day that we have, not in COVID alone, but just in life, is a gift and a blessing. And so again, sorry for those that had their season cut short when it was a Bluebird Pow Day yesterday. Hopefully you got that one. And the rest of us that are somewhere in the middle. There's so many different layers to balance. There's internal, external, there's micro, and there's macro. And again, thank you so much to both of the Jeffs and Heather and Susan for inviting me to be part of this. And I think the big win now will be the next part of the agenda, and I'll pass that back on to our host to carry us forward on the agenda.
Thanks, Josh. That was awesome. I think one of the things you've got dialed with balance is, as has been mentioned, you, Heather, and Susan, you're never static in balance. It's a pendulum. You're swinging from one side to the other, and then that helps you find your center. And you're, yeah, like you said, light the stick of dynamite and run. You're good in the chaos, but you've also found solace in that quiet too. So you've got that maybe a wider berth than most in that pendulum swing, but you can rip a ski over $120. So that's got some fine line balance for sure. So thanks for sharing, man. Always love listening. Thanks, Heather and Susan, as well. We appreciate all that insight for the show tonight. Entering into the question portion, not a whole lot coming through on the chat. If you have a question you'd like to ask, you can put your hand up. There's a reaction down at the bottom, smiley face, if you'd like to speak. Maybe before we get into that, though, there's one I'll put forth to Heather, Susan, and Josh. If any of you have a better or a good resource for developing a better understanding of how to use your breathing. So how to use breath to achieve balance. If any of you, maybe yoga instructors out there, have a bit more insight, or Susan or Heather, if you have some experience with using breath, maybe you could speak to that now.
Well, great question. And in all honesty, I think that I would defer that question to either Josh or Heather, because again, honestly, I'm in working with a trainer, and that's off snow. Sometimes it feels like I'm learning how to breathe again. And so I would say I'm a rank beginner at breathing, if that makes sense, in terms of controlling my breath. And yeah, I'm just entry level.
Me too. I say go Josh.
Well, Josh, what do they teach you in yoga about breath? I understand it's a large part of the practice that you're learning about and teaching now.
I'm a novice student, so I want to prefix that with any advice that I give. My wife is a novice student and novice teacher, and she would probably recommend a book called Light on Pranayama by BKS Iyengar. I haven't read it, so it's really kind of ill of me to make that recommendation because I haven't actually read that book.
What was the name of the book again there, Josh? A little slower.
Light on Pranayama.
Great.
So in essence, it's really, again, finding what resonates best with you and understanding perhaps that our breath can be our guide, and knowing that our breath can be our true teacher in many ways. For myself, and I know Jeff, you and I have shared similar teachers with Dr. John Coleman or Dr. Carlos De Leon. It's finding a teacher that resonates with you in a time that works for you, when you're open to diving a little bit deeper into the subconscious through our breath, but also knowing that it very simply, like in a moment of stress, when I'm feeling anxiety, and currently this pandemic makes it a little bit easier to feel anxious because we're all cooped up. And my kid does this at school, and she's in grade 2. It's just an elevator breath, just visualizing the breath go in, rising up, and then just exhaling. And just with her hands, she just literally follows the breath up with her hands and just creates an awareness to it. Another really easy breathing technique is like a box breath. So inhale for, call it 2 seconds, could be 5 seconds, could be 10 seconds, wherever you're at. Inhale, pause for 2 seconds, exhale, 2 seconds, hold for 2 seconds, and just go around and do that for a little bit and experiment with how your breath and your energy are lining up, and ask yourself if they're in balance. I find if I do a few yoga postures in the morning and then sit in stillness and observe my breath, I have a pretty good indication of how my day will be. And if I can already tell that my nervous system's right effed out of the gate, then I can manage and not react to the anxiety or stresses I feel with a lot more efficiency. If those anxieties and stresses catch me off guard partway through the day because I didn't have that check-in with my breath, then it tends to derail everything that I'm doing. And then I feel helpless and of like a victim of like, oh, why is it? I don't understand. So just literally letting your breath and observing your breath and allowing that to guide you, I think it goes a long way. And that's about as much as I know as a novice student, to be quite fair. I'm in no position to really teach, but I can tell you from a lived experience of observing my breath over the last, lifetime, but very consciously and intently, focusing on my breath for the last 12 or 13 years, it is life-changing. And again, opens up room for that sweet spot, both in the life that we live and the sports that we play.
Awesome. Bring